Describe the thick filament.
Myosin.
Okay, a helical strand of myosin protein with 2 cross bridges. What do the cross bridges have? Actin and ATP.
ATP.
Did we get that
Mm-hmm.
far? All right, let's go to the thin strand. Let's start with the bulk of it, which is, and how does it look? Double helix olive type balls.
Yeah.
And what's in the pit?
ADP.
Okay, ADP. All right, what covers the holes? Tropomyosin.
Tropomyosin.
And then what are the 3 kinds of troponin? First, what's attached to tropomyosin? Troponin T to tropomyosin. Big one attaches to
C.
calcium, and the little one is attached to the actin, which is troponin
I.
I. Okay? Now we shouldn't struggle with anatomy. That's 5 points right there, just doing the anatomy. Everybody clear on that? No skip-its. I'm only seeing blank pages Tuesday. Okay. All right, now let's start with the reaction. Okay? It starts with a stimulus.
Stimulus.
And it's going to do what? Travel down the neuron to trigger the release of
Acid.
acetylcholine from the vesicles. And he does what? Jumps the synapse, bonds to a receptor on the motor end plate. How's he going to travel?
Through the SR.
Both directions through the SR. At the end of the SR, what is there? The cisternae. And what's stored there? Calcium. Calcium's released. How's he going to go in? Through the T-tubules. And he hooks up with who? Troponin C. This pulls the tropomyosin off of the active sites. And who hooks up? The myosin comes and hooks up into the active sites, and what does he do? And that's called the ratchet or sliding filament theory. We're contracted. How are we going to relax?
Calcium.
Calcium has to go home. Where's home?
Calcium.
Through the SR. And what's going to break down the neurotransmitter? Acetylcholinesterase breaks down the acetylcholine, and the muscle will now relax. Okay. Not nearly as overwhelming if you can keep this guy in your head. Okay.
So that's another 5 points.
Yes. 10 points on this total. We good there? All right. Back to your lighter side of the notes today. Where are we going to get some energy?
ATP.
Yeah, we always have to have ATP. And so on these myosin cross bridges is an enzyme. The enzyme is called ATPase. Now we've tried to talk about enzymes before, and you know they're appropriately named. So ACE says it's an enzyme that will break down ATP. And so ATPase will break ATP down into what? ADP and phosphate. Remember, the P stands for the phosphate when we see that. Now, it's not about making ATP. ATP is worth nothing unless you use it. So, like everything, you have to break the bonds. So when we break ATP down and get ADP and phosphate, our energy comes out. So we have to have that ATPase to break down that ATP and release that energy. And so then it goes on to say that ATPase is an enzyme found on the globular portion of the myosin. Very little ATP is stored in the muscle. It has to be continuously remade. So how do we make it? Here we go again. Okay? Cellular respiration. If you didn't get it the first time, we got to get it sometime. ATP. Okay? First off, you know this first part is called anaerobic respiration. It doesn't matter if I have tons of oxygen available. I can't get to the Krebs cycle without doing this first. And so this is the anaerobic part, but this is the aerobic part. And the C3 will break down into what?
C2 and O.
And C.
Yeah, you're right.
And
Combined with an O or something.
Yeah.
It's been a while.
Then that C will hook up with what? Some oxygen and start forming our waste product, CO2. But again, it wasn't about forming the CO2, it was about breaking the bond. When I broke the bond, I got some energy. Do you remember what the name of this guy was?
Acetate.
Yep. Acetate. And so this was the aerobic process because it does what? Requires oxygen. Where does that occur at in the cell? Yep, he's our powerhouse. And this first step is called the Krebs cycle. Then we're going to further break down these C2s into what? Individual C's. What are they going to hook up with? More oxygens. Sorry, my brain's getting sloppy. And now we're in the electron transport chain. How much energy did I get in this cycle?
36.
36. How much did I get here? 2. But what do I do before I go here? Spin these 2 to go here, right? So I spin 2. So at the end of the cycle, I've produced how many? But I netted 36. Everybody remember that? If not, go back and check those notes some. All right, so let's go to our notes today. Page 5. Aerobic respiration occurs in the mitochondria in the presence of oxygen. Are you all familiar with hemoglobin? Hemoglobin is what makes your red cells red. And hemoglobin has this very rich component in it called iron. And iron is what hooks up to your oxygen. So if your red cells don't have much hemoglobin, you won't have much oxygen. So if you're low on blood, you're going to be low on energy, right? Because you don't have any to bond to. All right, so you know what hemoglobin is, or at least you're kind of aware of it now. Well, muscles have a protein in it, kind of like hemoglobin, except it's called myoglobin, muscle protein, or globin means protein. And so a pigment in muscle cells responsible for the red-brown color, it loves oxygen even more than hemoglobin does. So what's going to happen? It stores oxygen in muscle tissue, at least temporarily. Oh, your muscles are going to sandbag some oxygen, okay, just in case you're not giving them what they need. And so this reduces the muscle's need for a continuous blood supply during contraction, because what happens when a muscle is contracting? Here is your blood vessel running alongside it. And when your muscle contracts, it pushes your blood vessel in. So what happens to the blood supply? It stops. So if you don't have some oxygen stored in your muscle, you're not going to get any through your blood. So the design is so I can compress my blood vessel and still have oxygen going to the muscle. So blood flow is decreased during the constriction of a vessel in a muscle tissue when the fiber contracts and thickens. And so now, the breakdown of glucose, or remember, this can go both directions, right? I don't always have to eat a candy bar every time I think I need to get up. Okay, I've got glycogen available. So the breakdown of glucose or stored glycogen, or remember, we can use fats. They can get to, remember the acetyl coenzyme A diagram? We could get carbs, proteins, and lipids all into the Krebs cycle. We can use fatty acids in there as well to give carbon dioxide, water, and ATP. And so muscles, not only do they store some oxygen, but remember, they're one of the 2 places that store glycogen. Obviously, working is important to us. it's gonna sandbag the two things that the blood would take to other places that maybe you won't get blood to when you're working. And so glycogen is available and also that oxygen. And so muscles have their own store of glycogen. When exercise is strenuous, a point is reached where oxygen supplies are not sufficient to meet the energy needs. If you don't have any oxygen to go this way, your only other choice is to go this way. The problem with not having oxygen is you're going to build up lactic acid, and that will shut you down. You may think you can go, but you'll get to a point that you absolutely can't go any farther. Now, that's the aerobic cycle here, but this is anaerobic. And like I said, it doesn't matter how much oxygen you have available, you can't get there without going through glycolysis first. Lysis says I'm going to break down a glyc, which is a sugar. Okay? And so anaerobic, that occurs in the cytoplasm. Glucose is converted to pyruvic acid, which is converted to lactic acid. But what's the fate of lactic acid? Do you remember lactic acid gets to go to the liver to be reconverted to glucose? So when you get lactic acid buildup, all you have to do is rest a little bit and breathe. You don't have to go re-eat. You simply are going to take in enough oxygen to convert that lactic acid to glucose in the liver. And you'll try it again. If you're not in any better shape than you were before, you'll keep doing the gerbil loop, as I call it. Nowhere fast. How many ATPs did I get produced over here? 2. Okay, so I made 2 here, I spent 2, made 2. Produced how many in the gerbil loop? 4, but I have how many usable? 2. This by far much more efficient. All right, now, depletion of ATP after death results in the formation of rigor complexes and accounts for what our old timers oftentimes say before they die. Rigor mortis is already set in. Okay, it says I'm stiff. You know, a slang term for a dead person is a stiff. Okay? Unfortunately, yes, I have heard funeral directors come in and say, I'm here to pick up a stiff. You know, my rigor mortis is there. In healthcare, we're probably some of the crudest people. Okay, because it is a compensation of dealing with what we're dealing with. Did you see on Facebook somebody accidentally got their cell phone bumped during surgery? How their cell phone got in, I don't know, but they heard the whole conversation. It's not a pretty sight what's happening in surgery, okay?
No.
You know, once again, there's a lot of joke telling going on. There's a lot of stuff, and people they're like, oh, they're just intently working. You got a misconception, people. And if that's happening in a surgery, how much more you think's happening in a break room or whatever. And throughout healthcare, we're horrible at being able to adapt to what we have to deal with by making light of it. And so the old term for a dead person is a stiff, okay, because rigor mortis is set in. Well, how does this happen? The joints become fixed, muscles can't relax. So when your patients die on you in the nursing home or wherever, what do you do immediately?
We clean them.
Clean them up, because unfortunately the muscles have relaxed around the sphincters, so they probably have got rid of their waste. But then as soon as you get them cleaned up, you're then going to put them in position if a visitation is going to take place.
Yep.
Okay? Eyes got to be closed, arms over their chest, because if you don't, rigor mortis will set in when that body gets cold, and the only way they can get those things to move is to break them. Okay? And so it's going to take you 72 hours at least before that rigor mortis frees itself and they become more flexible again. Well, for most people, they have gone through their visitation within that 72 hours, or at least got them ready for visitation. And so we've got to allow this to take place naturally. All right, phosphocreatine, okay? Letitia, we call them CKs, creatine phosphate, okay? a high energy phosphate molecule is stored in the muscle. It's 4 to 6 times more prevalent than ATP. What's the role of phosphocreatine? He's the guy that's going to bring the phosphate group to the ADP. And what will he do? Make ATP. Then you'll break him down again. Phosphocreatine will bring more phosphate. The only thing you need to make ATP is keep adding phosphate. Where does the phosphate come from? Phosphocreatine. And so we have another enzyme that we measure during cardiac failure. Okay, they're called CKs. And we do fractions on them, a fraction called CKMB. There are 3 types of CK, and this is just FYI, so you can go there. Okay, if I want to know if you're having a heart attack, I'm going to do a CKMB because the MB is for cardio muscle. But if I want to know if it's another muscle, then I may do an MM or a BB. Okay, but CKMB by far is the one we do the most because we really need to know whether you're having a heart attack. Phosphocreatine is delivering that. So usually when you're having a heart attack, we will draw CKMBs and troponins on you, like I said, 4 times during a 24-hour period. But troponins should elevate faster than what CKs will. Okay. All right. Now, some terminology here. Oxygen debt. Well, what is a debt? Uh-oh. I spent more than I had, right? And so the amount of oxygen consumed above the resting level during a post-exercise period. So you ran to the point the lactic acid shuts you down, and if somehow you could sit here and measure how much oxygen you're sucking in, that's called your oxygen debt. How much you're consuming after the post-exercise period. Oxygen needed to convert lactic acid to glucose plus the amount the muscle cell needs to resynthesize ATP and creatine phosphate. And so however you want to think of it, you've got to replenish what you just used. Okay? And so another way of saying oxygen debt is how much it takes me to convert the lactic acid and the ATP and creatine phosphate. Imagine going into your banker and saying, I'm here to pay my debt. And you sit down across from them and you start going,
Sounds good.
wouldn't it? That's all it takes to repay oxygen debt, rapid breathing. Okay? Rapid breathing is the answer to your oxygen debt. During strenuous exercise, the respiratory and circulatory systems cannot supply enough oxygen, so glycogen breaks down to lactic acid faster than lactic acid can be converted back to glucose. In a large debt, a portion of the glycogen stored, as well as all the stored ATP and phosphocreatine must be replaced. If that's the case, you won't be doing anything. Okay? And of course, oxygen debt is going to be much, or your fatigue level is going to be much greater during heat, because when you're exercising, you create heat on top of being hot, and it will shut you down faster. Okay? And so now let's look at that term, fatigue. We use that all the time. Okay? Not just being tired. Fatigue says, I can't move anymore. A muscle that is contracted many times, exhausted its phosphate and glycogen, and has accumulated so much lactic acid, it will not contract anymore. I have seen some of these triathlons and what have you, that people get, within 50 feet of their success line, and they fall with lactic acid and can't drag themselves across. Okay? And so we watch a lot of cars in our house, and the little one is addicted to it. And Lightning McQueen, whenever he blows 2 flat tires, he gets to jump across the finish line. That's not reality. Okay? We aren't doing that when we get that much buildup. Okay? So we will just literally die straight in our tracks. But muscle cramps, why do you get them? Due to a lack of ATP. Remember, when you send calcium home through the SR, you're using a pump, an active transport system that requires energy. So in your head, you need to think when you're doing something, I better not overexert myself to the point I have no energy left to move my calcium back home, because if calcium stays there, I'm going to stay like this. I've got to have enough energy left to move calcium back home. If you don't, you get a muscle cramp. How do you solve cramps?
Mustard,
Banana.
pickle juice.
Okay, whatever you're doing, but many times do you just take and try to massage it? What are you doing?
Stretching.
You're moving the muscle off of your blood vessel so he can deliver what? The oxygen now. Okay, and so you're like, why does all of this work? Okay, when you're staying contracted, you're not getting blood flow. You've got to get that muscle off of that blood, otherwise it'll never open up to deliver the oxygen you need. And so cramping is part of it. And usually as you're starting out, working up or working out, yeah, it's going to be painful. But as you become more fit, the cramps should become less. Strenuous exercise over a period of time stimulates new capillaries to grow within the muscle. What? You guys that exercise have more blood vessels than I do? Yeah. So you shouldn't cramp as much because you've made new ones because you've done the work. Also, physical exercise produces mitochondria. That's where aerobic respiration is occurring. And so you have that ability for you. All right, next definition. An all or none response. Man, I love this. Nerves and muscles both share this. It says there's going to be a stimulus strong enough to produce a maximum contraction. There is no half job. I don't know about any of you growing up, but whatever I signed up for, you did it. 2 games, I don't like it. You signed up for it. You do it. You sign up, in our day we called them ECA, I don't know what you call them today, they were called extracurricular activities, they were clubs in your high school. Okay? And so if you were in them, okay, you signed up for them for the semester,
You stayed in it.
yeah, you didn't get any of this, I quit business. And the good thing about a muscle or a nerve, it says that I'm going to do it to the fullest or I'm not going to do it at all. Okay, now, how about a threshold stimulus? I asked you earlier, how do you wake up? If you're that person, and I think healthcare has done that for me, even on my days off, I can't seem to sleep past 4:30. And when you have to get up out of bed so many days, you don't even need the alarm, it just automatically happens. But yet your kids, you know, probably, particularly when it seems when they get to be teenage years, they can sleep for hours. Okay, so whatever that stimulus is, the weakest stimulus it takes to get a muscle to move is called the threshold stimulus. I don't need to pour water on your head if taking a feather under your nose would get the same reaction. Okay, and so a threshold stimulus, the weakest stimulus that initiates a contraction. And so then a muscle twitch. How many of you have had a twitch, particularly? Eyes are very good at that. A single brief contraction of a muscle. And so they're divided into 4 periods. How do we? I don't know. How did it get to video instead of computer? I don't know. Have I told you how much I hate technology? Did I touch that button? Okay, I'm just, you know, I think I'm losing my mind. Hey, there's divided into 4 periods. And so from the time of stimulus till you see something happen, we're called in a latent period. And so you're going to have a flat line that doesn't look like anything's happening. Then you're going to go through contraction, relaxation, and then you've got to have a refractory period. What's the word refract mean? Bend. Okay? My eyes, they refract the light to bend it on my retina a certain way. Your refracts light in order to bend it appropriately. And so you got to have a time of being able to bend back to normal or you won't contract again. And so we go through latent, contract, relax, refract. Okay? And so this is an example of what a myogram would look like. Myograms, guys, look very much like EKGs. And when we get into the nerves, we'll learn how to interpret that rise and fall that we see going on there. And so the next term, a staircase effect. In math, what is a sum? An adding effect, right? And you add several things together and you get an answer called the sum. Another term for this is summation. A gradual increase in the contractile strength of a muscle in response to repeated stimuli of the same intensity. Okay? What are we talking about? Several years ago, I had a meniscus tear and I had arthroscopic surgery. And so in order to make that knee a little bit more flexible, I thought I probably need to go hit a gym. Now, you know, being 55 years of age and going to Health Point to Dr. Norris was not the place I needed to go to a gym. It makes you look like you're crazy and you can't move. And so I decided to go to, it's closed now, what was it called? Next to Big Lots.
I know what you're thinking of, I can't think of the name either.
It's for women.
Curves.
Curves, okay? And what I liked, it was all women and a lot of geriatric ones. And so they have, you know, these little square pads or whatever, and you just kind of march in place for 30 seconds. And then you would move on a piece of equipment, and, you know, depending upon whether it was a rowing machine or whatever, you did everything for 30 seconds. You made 2 laps around, and they said that essentially you should burn like 450 calories. Now, my kids all said, that is not like going to gym. And I go, it's better than laying in bed. And nobody was making fun of me because there were people in worse shape than what I was. You know, I'm like, I don't need 300-pound bench presses, you know, going against me on the next one. But one of the machines they had was this stair stepper. And there was a pole here, and then there were these stairs. And, you know, initially, if you stand on the very outside of it, you're about this far off the floor. But if you put your foot right close to the pole, you're about this far. And it doesn't take as much to push down when you're that close to the floor. But over time, you were able to go out here with the same amount of energy and do that. Why? You had started establishing muscle tone. Your muscles stayed in a partial state of contraction to where you didn't have to exert as much the next time to go. It's painful to get to that point though. Okay? And so that's what summation. The muscle reaches a point where it doesn't relax completely before you stimulate it again. And the twitches combine. Why? Because you haven't had time to send the calcium all back to the SRF. How about tetanic contraction? This is not tetanus. Do you guys know how you get tetanus? We always talk about a barbed wire fence or rusty nail or whatever, but what's on that nail?
Right.
It is bacteria, okay? And we'll talk, his name, okay, get ready for micro. His name is Clostridium tetani. This is not a bacterial infection. This is a tetanic contraction. What is it? A sustained contraction due to the fusion of many twitches. And so if you start with these little twitches and eventually they keep fusing, you will get a contraction that is very hard to relax. And so it gives you a problem here. A given muscle exerts 50 grams of force during a single twitch. If it were to undergo a tetanic contraction, how much would it have to have before it wouldn't relax? Something greater than 50. And so the only choice we have there is 60. Muscle tone. Continuous state of partial muscle contraction helps us to maintain posture. Getting up every day is a huge thing in maintaining muscle tone. And sometimes, you know, you get residents or whatever and they're like, I just want to stay in bed today. And you're like, that's not an option. Because if you do it today, tomorrow you may not be able to. And so I'm like, do you have to be that mean to me? Because my daughter worked at St. Charles. She was a shower aide when she was in nursing school. And 5 a.m., you know, they start running people through the shower. And I'm like, really? I've worked my whole entire life and you're going to drag my hiney out of bed at 5 a.m. to take a shower that I'm probably not going to want to have because I done took one this week.
Yep.
Right? Why do I need another one? Haven't done anything. I don't smell.
Yes, you do.
The appropriate thing is I can't smell it myself. You know, if we get there.